Communicating always involves at least two people. If a child doesn't routinely respond and interact when you try to talk with him or play with him or engage with him, he's not connecting with you, and it's highly unlikely he's learning. So talking begins with connecting. Hello, and welcome to Talking Toddlers, where I share more than just tips and tricks on how to reduce tantrums or build your toddler's vocabulary. We're going to cover all of that, but here, our goal is to develop clarity, because in this modern world, it's truly overwhelming. This podcast is about empowering moms to know the difference between fact and fiction, to never give up, to tap into everyday activities so your child stays on track. He's not falling behind, he's thriving through your guidance. We know that true learning starts at home, so let's get started. Welcome, everyone. This episode, I'd like to share a new and remarkable workbook by another speech-language pathologist named Laura Mize, M-I-Z-E. And Laura has taught me so much over the past 15 years or so. She's a pediatric speech-language pathologist who specializes and has always specialized in the birth to 3 population. Laura founded and authors a website called Teach Me to Talk. She's the host of a very popular weekly podcast called Teach Me to Talk, the podcast, and has authored a number of training materials for both parents and professionals here in the United States and then across internationally. She's been doing this for a number of years. And it's interesting because I first started learning through her when we had these things called DVDs. And I'm sure most of you new moms who are in those 30s may not even remember what a DVD is, but her treatment manuals are used by early intervention professionals, speech language pathologists in graduate training programs and continuing ed conferences across the United States and many, many countries. At this point, I give Laura full credit for really helping me become a better and better and better therapist with the very, very early intervention kids that birth to 3. And I've shared here on this podcast before that I never thought I would end up working and loving to work with the very, very young children. In graduate school, to me, they were messy and unpredictable. So I took the medical route, right? We had 2 tracks that you could take in graduate school, the public school program or the medical, where I dove into neuro rehab, including brain injury, stroke, near drowning, trauma, all of that. And then I moved into the psychiatric hospitals. It was pretty popular to look at how social and behavioral problems were secondary to language processing problems. And therefore, the teens and young adults who couldn't keep up socially and or academically because the language demands were too demanding, they fell through the cracks. They got misdiagnosed. They certainly were misunderstood, often mis and over-medicated. And for years, they ended up feeling lost, depressed, and suicidal. So unfortunately, many of them ended up in the psychiatric hospitals as well. Our job at that time, just as a side note, was to do differential diagnosing. And as a team, every single teenager and every single young adult was evaluated and screened. And so it was a pretty remarkable several years where I learned a lot about testing, but that's a whole nother conversation. Sorry to, get sidetracked, but I wanted to share how I do have a number of mentors and colleagues and instructors who I continue to study under, because even after 35 years, we should never stop learning. Hopefully research and clinical impressions and outcomes and our clinical opinions change over time, especially anyone in the health field. I think need to continue to study. But the purpose today is to really share Laura Mize's podcast, her videos, her workbooks, because they're designed for, yes, people like me, licensed therapists, because we get continuing ed credits, but she also writes them for you, the parents. And I have sent dozens and dozens of families to her videos and her website over the years. And I have all of her links down below in the description box, so you too can go there and learn and expand your comfort zone. But I do preface every time I send someone to her website or her videos that she's a fast talker. And I don't think I'm a fast talker, but she's from the South. She really knows her stuff. She shares a lot of detail. So I often encourage parents to go and listen, be open to learning, be open to listening to new stuff, take notes, and don't be afraid to rewind. So today, my purpose is to really share and introduce her latest publication, which is called the Late Talker Workbook, 3 plans to support early language development for toddlers and preschoolers who are late talkers. And as always, it's a wealth of information, but I think this is one of her best, and this is her 9th workbook. I think this is the most parent-friendly, again, in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, hundreds and probably thousands of parents have truly benefited from her work over the years, videos and workbooks and everything. But this one, I think perhaps you could pick up right away and use it, start to implement right off the bat. And it could be simply because this one focuses on late talkers. And overall, I think they're a little less complicated than, say, a child with autism or a child with apraxia of speech, which are the other 2 areas that she really hones in on. I do think that Laura is just a few years older than me, but she recalls, just like I do, that we didn't study autism in the 1980s when we went to graduate school. We didn't have the children on our caseloads. And just as a side note, I confirmed this recently because I went back to Southern California and I had a luncheon with several of my college colleagues and friends and buddies over the years. And we spoke at length about how there was absolutely no autism in the 1980s. There were no children with those needs on our caseloads. And we had to learn, each and every one of us, in real time. One friend in particular just recently retired, and she spent her whole career in the school systems. And she said, I really was kind of set up for struggle and failure. I had to figure it out. We all were kind of scrambling to put these pieces together. And then my other dear friend, I won't name names, but she was a clinical director of a very prestigious rehab clinic in Southern California for maybe 13, 14 years. And then for the past 6 or 7 years, she's been teaching at a private Christian university there in Southern California. And we all agree, autism has exponentially grown over the last 30 years. And the challenges that children face now are so much more complex. And I've shared a lot of this, and you can go back to episode number 60, where I talk about, yes, there are genetic predispositions for all of these conditions: autism, ADHD, dyslexia, anxiety, all of these things, language processing problems. But of course, there's another component to it that we've recently learned about epigenetics and how our lifestyle choices actually permit those genes that's part of the DNA to express themselves or not. And I talk a lot about this in episode 60. In other words, our modern day lifestyle is definitely exacerbating early development across the board, not just speech and language, but sensory processing, anxiety, social anxiety, all of that. So go back and listen. I think it was date September 21st of last year, 2023. And the title was, Can You Prevent the Risk Factors That Lead to Autism or Language Delay? The reason why I share this is because Laura Mize, who just published her latest workbook that I'm sharing today, and going back to Southern California and chatting with my dearest friends and colleagues, we've all been in the field for 30, 35 years, and we see the same perspective, right? We have that data across the board to share with you, to inspire new moms and new dads to really step into this parenthood and do it differently, to make better, healthier, wiser choices. So Laura Mize, just like us, she had to figure it out on her own too. But the fortunate thing for us was that she wrote it all out. She's been writing these materials and putting together workshops and, as I said, continuing ed programs for us most of her career, at least the last 15, 20 years. I think she also has the biggest online continuing ed course list available to us. And all of these courses have to be approved by our national organization, which is ASHA, American Speech and Hearing Association. That's how we get our licensure. Well, we do have state license, so that's separate, but our national organization. The bottom line is that the gold standard research is minimal in our field because it's really hard to get funding. It takes years, and most of the time, children and moms can't wait that long. You guys need help ASAP. And that's the way it's always been. And the truth is, my field is simply not profitable to researchers. Yes, the institutions or the colleges will do research, but there's not a lot of people who invest because there's no, nor should there be, a drug to market. Right? That the profit is minimal. And so we look at therapy tools and it's kind of muddy waters. I'm just telling you the truth. I mean, yes, there's research, but a lot of our work is anecdotal, just like Laura Mize's work, just like mine and my colleagues back in Southern California. We're collecting this information. And the other complicating factor is, and you know this, the children are also unique. The families and lifestyles are always moving. And so it's hard to nail down this one-to-one correlation. Oh, X caused Y. That's just not how early child development works. It's kind of always in motion, always in flow. And yes, we have all gotten better at diagnosing. Yes, that's true, because as I said, we didn't get a lot of practice in graduate school in the 80s. And in the 1990s, when these kids started showing up at our door, in our offices, in our schools, in our clinics, we had to get better. We got better at treating and supporting these kids on the autism spectrum because we had to. I mean, when I started, and I just shared this because I ran down some numbers, but it was perhaps 10% of my caseload. And then it ended up being 75% of my caseload on the autism spectrum. And here's another point, and then I'll get on to today's subject. But no, we did not overlook them. And I'm sorry to say this, but that's just impossible. If that were true, where are those thousands of people in the 30s and 40s? They should be autistic adults, right? If we miss them in the 1980s and 1990s, or even the 1970s, where the heck are they? They would be 30, 40, 50 years old, and they simply aren't living among us. Yes, there are a bunch of 20-year-old autistic individuals, but that's because they were born in the late 1990s, early 2000s. But as I said, that's another conversation. The reason why I'm connecting all these dots, I want you to know how Laura Mize has come through real life as a remarkable clinician, has shared her knowledge and her information and her tenacity about really diving deep into these birth to 3-year-olds. So as I mentioned earlier, you may benefit from taking notes whenever you listen or watch any of Laura's videos. And all of this is free online for you guys. We pay for it because we want continuing ed credits, right? But you can also purchase the workbooks. This particular one that I'm going to focus in today is $80. And to me, in my opinion, it's well worth it. But you don't have to buy the workbook right now. I'm just going to give you some teasers, and we will continue to talk about some of the things that she has put together so nicely. And no, I don't get any affiliate fees for recommending her work. It's just because I think it's incredible material. Yes, sometimes it's a lot and can be overwhelming. And so I'm trying to share it with you piece by piece. But my purpose is to share, as I said, the highlights, hopefully entice you to watch some of her videos, take notes, download her PDFs because she has a ton available to you moms and dads. But the workbook is called The Late Talker, and here she covers 6 C's of communication. And I'll review only the first one today, and most likely some other of these C's in future episodes. I have touched upon all of these in previous episodes, and I'll make reference where it's appropriate. But again, she's pulled it all together. This is her newest workbook, and it's so nicely organized and good to kind of read through and pick apart what's applicable to you, and perhaps share it with your family. And or if you're in therapy now, I'm not quite sure, but you can always share it with them. First, let me kind of walk through the 6, and then we'll highlight number 1. So the first one is called connecting, and we're going to talk about that in a couple of minutes. Number 2 is referred to as conveying. So we therapists will often call this communicative intent. And what it basically means is that your child initially uses gestures, facial expressions, body language, and verbalization to convey a message. And that's number 2. Number 3 is comprehending. And so somewhere around his first birthday, give or take, he begins to link meaning to the words he hears. And in toddlers, receptive language is virtually inseparable from cognition. And I talk a lot about what cognitive skills are here because I think it's really important. We used to believe in the 60s and 70s and even in the 80s that cognitive abilities were kind of hardwired, but now we know that that's not true. So cognitive skills are how your child thinks, learns, remembers, pays attention, focus. When a child struggles with cognitive development, then understanding spoken language will also be challenging. So keep in mind that a toddler who doesn't say much, i.e. a late talker, may not understand much either. And so we need to be really, really sensitive in separating that out. Understanding words and phrases need to be established before they can really use words to talk and express themselves. And in another episode, I actually just in a few weeks, I have scheduled a topic called auditory processing, also known as receptive language or understanding. So all of these terms are the same, but it's how the brain takes in language through the auditory canal, the ears, right? And the right and left ears are different, but how they take in, so they perceive the language, then they have to interpret the language, then they can respond to the language. So it's often overlooked by therapists, doctors, teachers, and parents. And so I think, many parents will say, oh, she understands everything I say. But until we kind of sit down on the floor and play and engage and connect the words with her actions, can we really identify whether her understanding is on track. But that's number 3. Number 4 in this list of 6 C's for communication is called copying. And this is what you and I have referred to over the last couple of years as imitation. So a toddler needs to imitate gestures and words. And I've talked about this in previous episodes too, that babies must imitate gestures before they can imitate words. 16 gestures by 16 months. I'll have that referenced down below as well. And then number 5 is Laura Mize refers to it as communicating. And this is when your toddler begins to use words spontaneously and purposefully to share his or her messages with others. And that's the key, that it's spontaneous and purposeful. So there's a difference between spontaneous and imitation. And in another episode, we'll dive into that. But for now, when you go about your day and you're engaging with your little one, try to differentiate when they do express themselves, whether it's through gestures or through speech. Is it spontaneous or is it imitative? Is he copying you? Or is he trying to really express and share something independently, right? So that's a different thing. And then the 6th and final C in this list is called combining. And when toddlers combine words to make phrases. And in episode 69 and 70, they were published December 5th and December 12th just of last year, called How to Truly Help Your Toddler Use 2-Word Phrases. I dive deep into this because it's really, really, really important. But there's a lot of nuance, and so I want you all to understand. And I will link again because I have descriptions of this and outline. But usually linking 2 words together, that 2-word phrases, begins to appear between 18 and 24 months. And there seems to be a magic number or a sweet spot between minimum of 35 to 50 words. So your toddler needs enough words that they have something to talk about. And I dive into this, explain it further, but they also, these words, these 35 to 50 words, need to come from a variety of grammatical categories. So they can't all be nouns. Otherwise, he's going to have a limited pool to talk about. He can talk about daddy's coat. Those are 2 nouns. But he needs descriptive words. He needs verbs. He needs prepositions. So he can talk about the big ball or the blue truck. Or she can speak about sit under the table. So those kinds of things, they need a broad, grammatical categories to pull from. And as I said, I review and talk pretty deeply in both episodes 69 and 70 of last year. And we will definitely discuss this in the near future because it's such an important milestone. And as I said, teachers and doctors can measure it, so they talk about it quite often, but I don't think they understand the subtle nuances of how to support them or how to gauge where your child is on the hierarchy. But as us working therapists, the Laura Mizes of the world, me, my colleagues, we've learned throughout the years in real time on the floor how to navigate this, how to identify it. Laura has spent so much time recording and writing these workbooks. And as I said, I think this is one of her best, or at least the best for parents to easily navigate. The other ones are great too. Don't get me wrong. They're just pretty dense. But I think having the workbook, watching her videos can really help any parent if they step into this role. So just to outline, those are the 6 C's of communication. And so she's really focusing on birth to 3 years of age. So they, once again, are connecting, and we're going to walk through that gently today, or give you some highlights: conveying, comprehending, copying, communicating, and combining. And here's the cool part. Laura has always given us, the other speech pathologists, given us permission to share her handouts. So I have included a link down below and made a small bundle of a couple of different handouts, at least to get you guys started, where you can kind of analyze, where is your little boy, your little girl today? Where are they in this kind of developmental hierarchy? And how can you support him at home through everyday experiences, right? Everyday activities. So this workbook also lays out 3 plans that a parent can choose from, or a speech pathologist like myself. You could bring it to the school, whomever is helping you, right? But today I'm not going to walk through those plans. I just want to let you know that they're there. And that's really the bulk of the workbook. But these 6 C's of communication are how you work through each plan. And the plans can also be a hybrid too. So it's not necessarily that you pick one over the other, but you can see by the outline how this will help certain kids at certain time. So know that if you do end up finding yourself working with someone, whether that's by someone through the state or a private setting or a school setting, don't be shy and share this information. And if they're a little uncomfortable with it, then, give them a heart to heart and say, hey, I know it's tough to find good programs or good outlines or a procedure that we can follow and measure. And that's the tricky part about therapy, about measuring progress. A lot of it is subjective. And that's many, many other ways that I have shared Laura's work over the years when I took in interns that worked with me, that I coached, schools that I've consulted with, trainings that I've led. And unfortunately, school people tend to be a little bit more, quote, in the dark. Again, just my opinion. But they're in the dark when it comes to the work in the therapy sessions. So yes, they do a lot of play-based therapy, and we all should and do, right? I don't believe in flashcards with a 2-year-old, maybe a 7-year-old, but not a 2-year-old. So it has to come through therapy, but it has to come through play, but you have to have purpose and intention in that play. What am I working on? Am I trying to get them to imitate my gestures, my actions, my single words? We don't want to jump ahead or get the cart before the horse, because that's just going to make your child frustrated. I want you, mom and dad, to feel empowered to stay ahead of it, to prevent some of these issues. So these types of workbooks help inform you and empower you with knowledge, and then you can build a language-rich learning environment at home. So today's real goal is just to look at the first C in the list of those 6 C's of communication. I hope you're following this list, but it's really just to touch upon how Laura introduces what is connecting, and that is the first step with all children. And so I'd like to just read directly from Laura's workbook of how she defines this and how we, both the therapist and the family, can hone in on helping kids if they're not fully connected yet. So this is in Laura's words. Connecting is the real reason any of us learn to talk. And yes, of course, we talk to ask for things. We talk to interject our own wishes, our preferences, and opinions. We talk to ask questions and give answers. We talk to complain or protest for lots of other purposes. Talking is the natural extension of what comes before words, connecting. Before a child begins to use words, he establishes a consistent connection with other people. He makes eye contact, and everything about him says he's listening to you and sharing that experience with you. He looks at things you try to show him, and he even brings things to show you. She says, here's why connecting is so important. Communicating always involves at least two people. If a child doesn't routinely respond and interact when you try to talk with him, or play with him, or engage with him, he's not connecting with you. And it's highly unlikely he's learning. So talking begins with connecting. It's the essential first piece. And some of you might be thinking, oh, my child connects just fine. The key here is that he does it consistently, or she does it consistently. The key here is that he gives you eye contact as a form of connecting and a form of communicating. So in this fabulous workbook, Laura shares a lot of good examples and strategies. Here, I'm just going to touch upon a couple. I think there's like 7 or 8, but I'm just going to touch upon the 3 that spoke to me. And she defines them as practical ways to strengthen connecting. So the first one is stay connected so you can talk with your child all day long. Don't let her check out or be alone for long periods of time. And I assure you, this is not taught in graduate schools, but it needs to be. Because for too long, we've let kids, oh, he's happy in the corner, playing with his one truck or spinning the wheels or looking at the reflection in the light. And when they zone out, they go deeper and deeper inside. And the whole idea about these first 3 years is to build that relationship with other human beings. So to learn language, a child has to hear language. So stay together and talk about everything. And one of the things, and I think Laura taught us this a long time ago, or maybe she learned it from somebody else, but it was always like stay and play, right? That parents or grown-ups that are in charge, stay and play. Don't just put the toys out there and say, here, I have stuff to do over here. You just play by yourself. Not with a 1 or a 2 or even a 3-year-old. Not 24/7, and we can talk about what realistic expectations are. But the important part is talk about what your child is paying attention to, so she's more inclined to listen and then link meaning with your words. And I know this is hard to hear. I get it. But if you have a late talker, or even if you think you have a late talker, your daily routines and engagement are not enough. If they were, she wouldn't be a late talker. So you need to decide to change it up a bit. You need to give her more, but not just overwhelm her. It needs to be purposeful, intentional, systematic, and that's where this particular workbook highlights. Every situation is different, and I totally respect that. But my role as your coach, as your guide, as a therapist who's been in the thick of it for 35 years is just to share what I've learned by working with thousands of children for over 35 years, me, Laura Mize, my colleagues, and others, to share, put it all on the table. And one piece of very strong research, and that's been replicated, indicates that children who are significantly behind with speech and language need 20 to 25 hours of, quote, therapy a week. And you're thinking, what? Yeah, I know. That's a big number, but that's where we saw the needle move forward. And the truth is that's impossible with an outside service, with a person like me or anybody else. There are programs called ABA, and I'm certainly not going to get into that, but that's where some of the research came from. And then we looked at other programs too. I was involved with a program called Fast Forward. The point of all of this is it is nearly impossible with an outside service, but it can and does happen over and over and over again with the family. And as I've shared before, both for years in my practice and then here online, whatever we do as therapists in our therapy sessions, you mom, you dad, you grandparent, you can do all of that at home. There's nothing magical. We just know some of the developmental milestones better than you. But I'm trying to give you workbooks and notes and data points that you can shine a light on that too. And Laura Mize's work agrees. That's why she wrote this particular workbook for therapists to up their game. And honestly, I think a lot of us can be a little lame at that. I'm sorry. But moms and dads and grandparents, like I just said, you all can hone your play skills, be intentional with everyday routines, stay present, and include them during meal prep and household chores, right? If you're doing laundry, give them a few things to sort. If you're washing dishes, give them a damp rag to wash and talk about what you're doing. If you're going to do some bills or write, hopefully it's not on a screen, right? You can't do that with them, but give them some writing tools to mess around with the paper and the utensils. But it all adds up to these 20 to 25 hours. Yes, you still need individual playtime. Yes, you need one-to-one, quote unquote, therapy sessions at home. But you can snatch those periods too. Let's share a meal and make it language-based. Another practical way to strengthen connecting, this first C, and this comes from the workbook. And you know, I strongly encourage all of you to do this, is to limit screen time. And I know, again, that's a hard thing to hear. It's a hard thing to swallow, a hard thing to live through. But a child who has problems connecting with other humans often prefers screens over those people because connecting with people is too hard. Looking at a screen is passive. It does not require them to do anything. You know that. We've all sat in front of TV shows and just, blown an hour or two or three. But little babies, they learn best from real people who love them and are talking about real things going on in their immediate environment in real time. And Laura outlines this on page 128. If you get the book, you can refer to it. But meanwhile, I'm kind of getting some validation here, and it's good. The goal is to do an interview with Laura later on this summer to get our schedules lined up. But for now, I really wanted to share what the excitement about this particular workbook. And then a third one that I thought would be a practical way to strengthen connecting. And I'm just highlighting these here, these three. She has, as I said, 6 or 7, but is to stop focusing on their bad behaviors. And we can all do that, especially with toddlers. Redirect, no, stop, please, go over here, go over there, right? But if we can learn, or if you can learn to read your child's cues so that then you can avoid those power struggles, the meltdowns and hurt feelings, respond to your child's needs with love and support, Because the truth is, not being able to talk is tough enough. And they can't express themselves very well. So we have to be better detectives at reading their body language and getting them on routines so that they begin to learn what to expect. So this third practical tip really supports the concept that a toddler would if he could. And I've heard parents over and over again, and is that, they think their son is just stubborn, or they think the daughter is shy. And, one of my infamous words here is that's hogwash. Because when kids can talk, they do talk. And Laura says this over and over again as well. But the bottom line is kids really don't, quote, hold out on talking. They simply don't have that cognitive skill or that sophistication to be that clever. That's a myth. And I think it's important that once parents can shift that mindset, then the power struggles, meltdowns will begin to subside. And yes, you're still going to have toddler behaviors. You're still going to have to redirect them and show them what to do instead of just telling them what not to do. But I assure you, it'll happen much less frequently and with much less intensity and drama. Our goal is to help your toddler understand the power of speech and how a dialogue, a back and forth, will get them so much more in this life. And that starts with connecting. Spending a lot of quality time together, modeling, talking about your day, sharing tasks, reading, singing, getting dirty, and then getting clean. All of those things really, really build that foundation, gives them opportunity. Everyday tasks, and I talk a lot about this, everyday tasks are the cornerstone to enhance communication, both nonverbal and verbal. You can play and just make animal sounds. You can play and just make environmental sounds. Because if your goal is to get him to imitate you, or for him to stay in play, or for you to stay in play, and extend that 2 minute to 5 minute to 7 minutes, and to share back and forth non-verbally, that's cool. You're expanding his connection. And I will be sharing more of this fabulous workbook in the future episodes. Today's intention was to first introduce Laura's website, her videos, and the materials for purchase if you want. Otherwise, I'll continue to share with you, and then over time, if you want, you can. But all of the videos on her YouTube channel are free, and the handouts for you guys are free. It's called, remember, Teach Me to Talk. All of her business platforms are that. And on page 125, I just want to kind of wrap up this whole connecting. She highlights this. The bottom line for connecting is a tuned out, disconnected child misses vital opportunities to learn language. Relationships and fun, loving connections are the foundations for learning to talk. So, as you can probably get through my repetitive excitement here, there's a lot of remarkable information on her website, like I said, but particularly in this workbook, especially if you think that your child is a quote unquote a late talker. In this book, she also differentiates the two very different pillars or definitions of a late talker. And I've highlighted those in the past too. But for right now, let's just go with whatever you're imagining in your head. But I think, any and all toddlers would benefit from their parents kind of gaining more knowledge, right? Gaining more information. The more you, mama, understand how kids develop, then it's easier for you to support that healthy natural development. It's a win-win, right? You feel great and empowered and confident, sure of your choices, and then he or she, your beautiful child, follows suit. So thanks again for spending your precious time with me. I truly appreciate it. And if you would be so kind to look at all the links below, sign up for my email list, get the handouts, dive deep, listen to her videos, and I'll see you next week. All right, take care. Bye.